If stimulants make you anxious, then you don't really have ADHD. That's bullshit.
Dan Fried.
He is the founder of Nootropics company, Stasis,
a company developing personalized supplements to enhance cognitive function.
What are the top 5 adverse reactions to stimulants that you see?
Trouble sleeping, jitters, depression, changes in personality, and then lastly, crash. People who haven't felt it are just like, oh yeah, you're tired. It's like, no, I'm not tired. My world is collapsing and I don't know what's wrong with me.
But what's the solution?
Nootropics is kind of like this broad classification of ingredients. They include vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, botanicals, and it's what powers both of our products.
What is the connection between ADHD, stimulants, and anxiety?
Have you heard of the Yerkes-Dodson law?
No.
So
this episode is dedicated to anyone who is calmer in a crisis than they are in everyday situations. This sponsored ad was agreed to be 90 seconds long, but because I know most of you have ADHD, I negotiated it down to 89 seconds. I challenge you to test your ADHD by seeing if you can sit still for 1 minute 30 seconds while I tell you about our sponsor, Tiimo app. If I can sit down and record take after take of this message for 2 hours, then I'm sure you can listen to 90 seconds. So here's a short word from our sponsor. Tiimo app is a perfectly tailored app that I use daily, and maybe it's worth you giving it a try to see how it might improve organising your life too. Running a podcast is actually a lot harder than you might think, and juggling all of the moving parts would be near impossible if it weren't for Tiimo app. How? Well, Tiimo is designed specifically to hack the neurodivergent brain, a brain that might struggle with time agnosia, object permanence, memory cognitive load, task initiation, anxiety, or procrastination. All things I'm extremely guilty of too. And how on earth does it help you, Alex? I hear you scream impatiently at your computer or phone screens. Well, the award-winning Tiimo app is the perfect life-hacking tool to help your time management and kick you up the bum when you need it most. If you want to stay ahead of the competition, then the visual planning Tiimo app is specifically designed to help your structuring, organising, focusing, and goal setting. It has a visual timer providing a tangible and visual representation of time to help users pace themselves so you never miss a deadline ever again. It also has an efficient lock screen reminder service to alert those of you who are very out of sight, out of mind with your chores and afraid you might forget them. It brilliantly centers all of your tasks in one place across devices, both on a web and mobile apps, to streamline your overflowing schedules and make them much more digestible and a lot less intimidating. And for those who find big tasks too overwhelming to even start, Tiimo breaks them down into more manageable subtasks to get the ball rolling. In fact, this app helps me so much that it actually reminded me to record this message to advertise the app. Give it a go. Why not? It might just help. Anyway, back to the episode. Dan, thank you so much for joining us, all the way from America. It's an honor to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to pick your brains about all things ADHD management. But first, before we get into the meat of the episode, I ask all my guests to tell me an item that most represents ADHD for them. And I'm going to reveal your item now from underneath this cloth. Now, it's probably worth just saying what that is before we move on. Is that a pair of, what is that?
So I cheated and brought 2 items. This is my psychopharmacology textbook and a milligram scale. And to me, this represents when I finally just said, I'm going to figure this out. Like, I had been around, like ADHD had basically limited my possibilities in life so severely, and I wasn't going to take it anymore. And I had been so tired of trying to go to the medical community for a solution and trying to find different things that I was just like, I'm not giving up. Like, I am going to figure out how to focus because if I don't figure this out, the rest, I'm not going to reach my potential in life. And so that meant reading that book cover to cover, really understanding the neuroscience behind why my brain is different and how I can support it. And then the milligram scale was when I started testing nootropics different supplements that would modulate the levels of neurotransmitters in my brain so that I could focus and accomplish my goals.
And that was the first step. That's what led you on to start the company and found Thesis and Stasis?
No. So I didn't even think of starting a company. That was so far before that. I never could have imagined how my life would turn out. It was basically when I started really experimenting on myself, I was burnt out. I was trying to switch my career and I wanted to go back to school. And so the type of focus that I was trying to do, I had never been successful at my entire life. Going back to when I was like 4 years old, I just couldn't sit and study. And now the one thing in the way of me achieving my goals was getting a good score on this test. And I had to figure out how to study. And I just couldn't do it. I kept hitting this wall. And this point when I bought the scale was like, there's got to be a way through. I don't care what it is, but I'm not giving up. I gave up on high school. I dropped out when I was 16. I never graduated high school. I never passed 10th grade. And I remember that feeling. And it was demoralizing. I watched my friends graduate high school, go off to college. I was working minimum wage jobs in fast food. And when I bought that, it was just, I'm not going to let that happen again. And thank God, like it took time, a lot of time, a lot of trial and error. It wasn't just like an immediate light switch, but when I found the right ingredients for my unique brain chemistry, I was able to study longer. I was able to retain information. And the test I was studying for was the GMAT, which is actually really interesting that I didn't bring my GMAT study guide, because that was the other thing that I was like reading at the time, trying to figure out. Because the GMAT is so long ago, I couldn't even remember half the things that are on there, but that psychopharmacology book is so deeply ingrained in me.
What's the GMAT for the UK listeners?
So I'll take a step back. The GMAT is the entrance exam for an MBA. And when all of this was happening, I was 28 years old. I was a chef. I was a very successful chef. And I realized I no longer wanted to be a chef. And in order to transition to something else, I felt the best path forward was to go to school. And I decided on an MBA. I had actually interviewed with school here in the UK. And because I don't have a high school diploma, I never took the SATs, I don't have an undergraduate degree, I'm like the least qualified person for an MBA possible. It was very difficult to find a school that would even listen to me. And there was one in the UK that said, I had worked in a Michelin 3-star restaurant in France. I was really top of my career as a chef. They said, based off of your unique experience, we'll admit you just need to hit a 650 on the GMAT, which is like the 80th percentile. I think it was 650, something like that. It was 80th percentile or above. And so that gave me this goal where I knew if I did this, my life would change. And that's when I decided to solve my problem.
It's such an echo, the hearing you say, why can you not understand why everyone seems to just be like progressing with ease where things are a struggle for you? You can almost sort of see that picture being painted that was the foundation of a motivation to improve yourself. Your journey into understanding and recognizing that you have ADHD, where did that start?
So it's really interesting. When I look back now, I was expelled from preschool at 4 years old. I have no memory of that. My parents told me. I remember when I was 6, and I remember this in retrospect, knowing what I know now. I don't think at the time I really understood what was happening, but I went to a psychiatrist. It was mandated by the school because I was constantly in the principal's office, and they diagnosed me with ADHD, and they wanted to put me on medication. I always had issues with school. And looking back, like I have the classic symptoms of ADHD. I have oppositional defiance. I was just always a difficult time in school. Some of the things that I really understood that I was different, my sister, She's a doctor. She's a pediatrician specializing in genomics. I remember we would come home from school. She would just sit there and do her homework. And it was like nothing to her. And I was like staring out the window. It was torture. I was trying everything in my body, what could I do to sit and focus? I wanted it more than anything. And I couldn't do it. And people called me stupid. People called me lazy. I almost started to believe them because I just didn't have proof points. And I knew that I was different. I didn't know what ADHD was. I didn't know how to work with my brain. I think what was different about the time when I bought this was, so after I dropped out of high school, I started working in fast food. And I got a lucky break and became a chef. This was a huge unlock because it was something I was interested in that paid money. This was the first time that had happened in my life. And so I could hyper focus, which is something that's very common in ADHD. I had this interest. I would fall asleep reading cookbooks, which is crazy. I didn't have to force myself to do it. And I just became wildly successful. I got promotion after promotion. I started traveling around the world. I worked in a Michelin 3-star restaurant in France, worked my way up to saucier there. By about 24, I was managing 50 people. And so when I went to study for the GMAT, I knew I wasn't stupid. I knew I was capable. I didn't think I was lazy. I just knew that I couldn't approach things in the same way as my sister. I needed some type of support. I needed something different. I needed to work with my brain. And this was the start of me trying to figure that out.
Gosh, there's a lot there, isn't there? I mean, it's that relatability of being told that you're different too much because you're living in a neurotypical world, and because you are a little bit different, perhaps, then you do feel that you're odd, and the sort of mental health effects of that can compound to create low self-esteem. But when you found your thing, the thing that did align with how your brain works, like so many people with ADHD, you can absolutely excel and become world-beating at. I remember an analogy that went around the internet explaining that the same bottle of water you get for £1 or $1 in a local store costs £7 in an airport. It's not the item that changes, but the value depending on where it's placed. Do you think this is true of the ADHD mind?
I really like that analogy, where I would say that there's some nuance. When I was a chef and when I was saucier, that's a very technical position. I was incredible at it and I loved it. And I was absorbed in this creativity of how do I create the next dish? How do I invent and move things forward? In just about any profession, as you become successful, to get really successful, you need to manage people. You need to manage budgets. And then before I knew it, when I was 28 and burning out, I have spreadsheets and I have to do food cost and I have to do scheduling and I have to use Excel. And what was originally something that I was just so wildly passionate about starts weighing on me. And that's where I would hit my limitations with ADHD. And I knew that if I didn't find a way through, I was going to be severely limited in life. I just knew it. And luckily, at that point, I just had that will where I was like, I'm going to try anything to get past this.
And what was the thing that got you past that moment?
Nootropics changed my life. Most people think nootropics they're just bullshit. Most people come to me and they say, do nootropics work? The question they should be asking is, which nootropics work for my brain chemistry? So nootropics are supplements that modulate the levels of neurotransmitters in the synapses of the human brain. Similar to how medication works, they can increase levels of dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, things like that. Let me say really quickly, I tried medication. I've been on and off medication for decades. there's nothing wrong with taking medication. It's highly effective and well-researched. For me, it gives me horrible side effects. I like to joke that Adderall should come with a warning label, may cause you to become an asshole. In short periods, I'm much more productive. And I get that classic ADHD thing where it just flips and I'm able to do things that I would think were impossible. It just becomes easy to me. But as time goes on, I get a heightened stress response. And I get this I get angry. It changes my personality. I get irritable. I live in New York. When I'm on Adderall or Vyvanse, I would go into a Starbucks and the people in front of me in line are just sitting there talking and, going about their day and they're waiting in line. I'm like, what? I have like this 3-year-old in my head throwing a tantrum and having this meltdown in my head, and I can feel my heart racing. And it just made these moments in life so unbearable. And I noticed that people didn't want to be around me. So a lot of my relationships suffered. It was a difficult decision. And again, it was a very personal decision to me. Not to take medication. And it was because the long-term effects on me outweighed the short-term benefits. And so that's when I really turned to nootropics. And thankfully, I was able to, through a lot of trial and error. So getting back to what I was saying before, most people think nootropics are bullshit. Most people will try one nootropic, and if it doesn't immediately work, they just give up. With that scale, I'm like, I am methodically going to test every single nootropic on the planet. And if there is anything to this, I'm not going to give up until I've decided, okay, like once and for all, they don't work, and move on to the next thing. And it wasn't just nootropics. At that time period, I was like literally anything. I was desperate. I was ice baths, meditation, different workout routines, dieting, fasting, anything that I thought could help my focus. And I had a breakthrough with nootropics first. I developed a lot of other healthy habits that kind of like compounded that positive feedback cycle. But when I found the right ingredients for my brain chemistry, everything changed. And it wasn't like a light switch. It was more my scores on the practice test would go up. Instead of looking up at the clock every 5 minutes when I was studying, it was like 20 minutes, then 30 minutes. And then before I knew it, I would just be absorbed in something. And I started making progress really quickly. And that's when I saw there's really something here.
So Dan, in the very simplest of terms, what are nootropics? How do they work? And what research have you done to back them up?
So nootropics are ingredients that modulate the levels of neurotransmitters in the brain. The availability of neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin control everything that you think and feel. There's a wide body of evidence on nootropics, and it depends on your definition of nootropics. Under a broad definition of nootropics, Adderall and medications would fit into it. Under a more narrow definition of nootropics as being natural ingredients, things like ashwagandha, L-theanine, caffeine, these are all very widely used. There's thousands of clinical trials on their efficacy, and we know that they work.
And those ingredients, they're in Thesis?
They're in both Thesis and Stasis.
Right, okay.
So we use, nootropics is kind of like this broad classification of ingredients that promote different cognitive states. But they include vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, botanicals, and it's what powers both of our products.
There'll be a lot of people listening that are on ADHD stimulant medication. And having listened to the community, anxiety is a concern when taking ADHD stimulant medication. What is the connection between ADHD stimulants and anxiety?
Have you heard of the Yerkes-Dodson law?
No.
There's several things that I want to break down. Yerkes-Dodson, I think, is one of the key concepts that people should understand. It's a curve where for some tasks, the higher your level of arousal, the easier the task gets. But at some point, you get diminishing returns, and then it even starts negatively impacting your productivity. And it's different for different tasks. So let's say you're painting a wall, and you're just painting everything white. The curve would be over more towards this way, where the more arousal you get, the easier it gets. And then when you hit that level of diminishing returns, you're on a really high dose of some type of stimulant. If you're doing creative thinking, then the curve's way back here, because the type of activity in your brain, arousal can cause it to be more difficult for that type of thinking. Does that make sense?
And if someone wants to prolong that state that they're in high productivity, how does one go about that?
So this is what the last 30 years of ADHD medication innovation has really targeted. It's called pharmacokinetics, how the medication moves through your body. So essentially, Ritalin started to become widely prescribed in the 80s, then you had Adderall in the 90s, then you had things like Concerta. All that is it's essentially targeting the same mechanisms, but it's evening out that curve. So before, with Ritalin, it's kind of like up and down. And then they packaged it up in Concerta, where it gets released evenly throughout the day, or more evenly. Because before, people would have this massive lift in arousal, and they would be able to focus, but you have some times where you're above that kind of like optimal point, and you have a lot of times where you're below. And so they would have multiple dosing in the day, and it gets really complex. Most of the innovation is just kind of like, how do you flatten that curve so that people are in that sweet spot, in that target for longer? What we are doing at Stasis is, this is a very predictable curve. There are other ways to ensure that people are hitting that target optimal amount of arousal. And we have ingredients that support that. And to me, it's kind of like a no-brainer. I'm shocked that other people aren't targeting those same mechanisms. So that's one thing. And that's Yerkes-Dodson law, and it's just the pharmacokinetics of stimulants. Another is the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The stimulants are called sympathomimetics, where essentially they activate the sympathetic nervous system. This is involved in fight or flight. Parasympathetic is more kind of like rest and digest. And the more you activate the sympathetic nervous system, it has some benefits. It also has some drawbacks. So it can give you a heightened stress response. Stimulants are also known to increase levels of glucocorticoids, cortisol, and this can, again, push you more towards this fight or flight. All of this creates heightened anxiety, nervousness, jitters. One of the things, this is one of the biggest stigmas I think that people have around ADHD medication. They say if stimulants make you nervous or jittery or anxious, then you don't really have ADHD. That's bullshit. When you look at the clinical studies on Adderall, on Vyvanse, on Ritalin, they say common side effects include anxiety, nervousness, irritability. Those clinical trials are done on people diagnosed with ADHD under the care of a clinician. The highest possible, it's the pinnacle of research. And common side effects to that include those side effects. It's not that you don't have ADHD. It's not that you don't need medication. It's that you're getting a normal side effect to it. And up until now, there was really nothing that you could do. And I remember feeling helpless. I had those side effects. And I would look down at that pill in the morning and I would say, I have two choices. And it was binary. It was, I can either take my stimulant and be productive during the day, but have this miserable crash, have this irritability, have this bad mood. And at night, I wouldn't want to be around people. It would kind of like destroy my social life. Or I could not take the stimulant And then every ounce of energy during the day is going to be, how do I stay on task? How do I get what I need to done? And I'm going to have this like hanging over me that I'm not being productive, that I'm not doing my to-do list, and it's going to destroy my day. But at night, I'm going to be able to go out and feel kind of normal. And that was my life for years. Now there's something that you can do about it, and that's Stasis.
And why are you the right person to create a product like Stasis?
Going back to when I picked up the psychopharmacology textbook and started experimenting on myself, this has shaped my life. More than anything else that I can think of, it has, in some ways given me opportunities that I would never have, and in some ways limited my experience. But I remember the sheer amount of pain that I went through in school. I got married a couple of months ago, and we're going to start trying to have kids.
Congratulations.
One of the big things in this conversation was I am scared shitless that my kids are going to have ADHD and go through what I went through. And so it just weighs on me so much. If it wasn't for my knowledge around ADHD and for seeing my friends have children who have ADHD and manage it much better than the way mine was managed when I was a child, I don't think I would have kids. And so having that weight of the problem, I think, is one qualification. But that's just one piece of it. The other piece is, to me, it's almost absurd that doctors and the medical establishment and pharmaceutical companies aren't tackling this problem. So, for example, when we looked into the research of what can you take with stimulants to reduce some of the jitters and nervousness, L-theanine. It's an amino acid. There's a wide body of evidence for taking L-theanine alongside stimulants, including amphetamines, to mitigate this. And L-theanine's common. It's an amino acid found in green tea. Why don't they make Adderall with L-theanine or Vyvanse with L-theanine? And what's really interesting is it's very difficult. Like, I'm from the US. The way the US pharmaceutical industry works is it costs $1 billion to bring a drug to market. And the only way that you can afford that expense is if you can patent the innovation and you can create a high-priced drug and you can make back the money. If you look at ADHD medications, each time they create something, mostly pharmacokinetics, so, Vyvanse or Concerta, it's like a new way of packaging up something that is well known to work, a form of a stimulant, and they can patent that innovation. It's possible, but much more difficult to patent a multi-molecule medication with a pharmaceutical drug and an over-the-counter supplement. Because imagine if they made Adderall with L-theanine and then they pay all this money to take it through clinicals, but you could just take generic Adderall, which is, 10 cents a pill, and go on Amazon and buy L-theanine. It's just, there's no financial incentive for them to do it. And that's why I think Stasis is uniquely qualified to tackle this problem.
A broader question just on ADHD medication for now. Do you think there's enough general research done on ADHD medications before they get rolled out to market?
I think ADHD medications are highly effective. They're some of the most researched psychoactive medications on the planet. Where I think the research is lacking, there's basically two areas. So one, long-term research on the effects. And three areas, sorry. So there's three areas where I think the research is lacking. One is the long-term research on the effects of stimulant medication. One of the things, there's several studies that suggest taking stimulants increases levels of cortisol and oxidative stress. We don't know what that does over time. So potentially you could be damaging cells, neurons, and have long-term negative effects. There's also something called the oxidative stress model of aging, or the free radical theory of aging, where you could be accelerating your body's natural aging process. I don't think that there's enough research on that. I don't think that there's enough research on high dose medication. So at Stasis, we did a consumer perception study. We basically sent a survey out to 700 people. We asked them what medication they take, what dosage, when were they first diagnosed, asking them about their medication journey. Anything 40 milligrams or above of Adderall is considered high dose medication. And there's very little research on what happens when you start prescribing above that amount. In our consumer perception study, more than 20% of people were on high doses. The highest dose that was legally prescribed, and this is crazy, was 90 milligrams of Adderall. There were quite a few people taking 80 milligrams of Adderall daily. There's zero research of what that does to the human brain. Given how prevalent that is, I think that we need to kind of dive in. I don't want to say there's no research. There is research, but it's more on stimulant abuse. And quite frankly, the findings are pretty horrific. When you get to adults using stimulants in high dosages prescribed by a doctor, I've seen very little research. And then the third area, and this is even more concerning, is stimulants combined with other psychoactive medication. So again, in our consumer perception trial, we found more than 20% of people were taking multiple psychoactive medications. So a very typical journey will be somebody starts with a stimulant. Over the years, their dose slowly escalates. It titrates up as their body gets more accustomed to it. And then they start exhibiting symptoms of another disorder. So something like depression, anxiety, insomnia. They go back to their doctor. Their doctor says, no problem. Take a Xanax, take an Ambien, take an antidepressant. And before you know it, people are taking 2, 3, 4, or 5. That is crazy. We found people taking 5 psychoactive medications. There's very little clinical research on what happens when you start mixing amphetamines, stimulants with other psychoactive medications. And essentially what we believe at Thesis and Stasis is if you're targeting the root causes of some of these downsides, like oxidative stress, elevated cortisol, heightened stress response through the sympathetic nervous system, you can de-escalate some of these other issues so that, it's not to say that people shouldn't take more than one psychoactive medication. I'm not a doctor. I don't judge people who do. I think that it's way too common and it should be the last resort instead of something that's just casually given to people.
You mentioned earlier ADHD stimulant medication can, if taken over time, raises cortisol, and there's no long-term studies to show what the effect of that is. What do you think the long-term effect of that might be?
So it is conclusive. In my view, there's a wide body of evidence that stimulants increase cortisol, period. There's rat studies, there's monkey studies, there's studies in children, there's studies in adults, there's hair cortisol, serum cortisol, there's saliva cortisol. It's conclusive. There isn't enough long-term evidence on how sustained it is, how elevated it is. So in short-term studies, you're talking about, in some cases, a 50% increase in cortisol. I naturally have high cortisol. I think I will die of a stress-related disease. More than 50% of the US population will die of a stress-related disease. I was talking to you about Robert Sapolsky, Dr. Robert Sapolsky. I've read a lot of his research. Most of it is on stress and how it impacts the body. You're talking about cardiovascular disorders, neurodegenerative diseases. So many things are tied to stress. And I think it's crazy to me that when people are taking a stimulant, knowingly, predictably elevating their cortisol, they're not doing anything about it. There's the short-term, irritability and heightened stress response, and it puts your body into fight or flight more often. Those are things that people kind of notice, but there's the long-term negative effects that it has on your brain, on your body that's much, much more concerning. and not well studied.
And with Stasis, was there a degree of trial and error through the development process?
With everything we make, there is a robust trial and error process. So we have collected data on thousands of people in our beta testing process over the last 8 years. We have hundreds of thousands of customers who have gone through, tried different iterations of the product. We're always constantly improving. I actually brought with you, Stasis is going through a reformulation process. It's something that I absolutely love. It's kind of like, again, going back to the psychopharmacology book, I have this tradition that when I do reformulation, we leverage a lot of AI when we do it. We actually built this whole AI system to do systematic reviews. This is part of what I learned during my time at Yale, how to conduct systematic reviews, evaluate the evidence of different ingredients. Going back to kind of like what excites me, I fall asleep a couple nights a week now reading PubMed. I just love it. I'm always like, what's this ingredient? What's the mechanism of action? How would that fit in? And so after all of this work, we come up with different variations of the formulation. And I brought a couple here so you can see what it looks like. So this is the next Stasis daytime formulation. We have an A variant and a B variant. And right now there's more than 100 people taking these. And we have it as a crossover randomized controlled trial. It's single blinded, so nobody knows what they're taking which day. And then we use the same scales that you would find in a trial for antidepressants, insomnia medication, anti-anxiety medication, same kind of like clinical endpoints that we would use. And we ask them, how do you feel when you're taking this? And we do statistical analysis. And if we can't find something that's better than our current formula, we don't launch it. And we're constantly doing this. Beta test after beta test over the years. I can't even count how many. Again, we've had thousands of people go through this process. There's no easy way to do it. So you need to do the research, you need to do the systematic reviews and analyze all of the clinical evidence, and you need to do testing in humans. And most companies don't do that second part, or if they do, it's a small check the box. We do it on thousands of people.
And the levels of oxidative stress that Stasis helps with?
So Stasis is short for homeostasis, which is the body's ability to essentially achieve balance. Stimulants throw your body out of homeostasis. One of the ways that they do this is through oxidative stress. So I'll give you just kind of like a basic scientific explanation for it. And again, there's nothing controversial here. There's tons of studies. We deeply understand the mechanisms of everything I'm about to say. Stimulants increase levels of dopamine and norepinephrine in the synapse. That's where all the benefits come from. Depending on the stimulant, so Adderall releases more dopamine from the presynaptic neuron. It also blocks the reuptake of dopamine. So your body is incredibly efficient and is always trying to recycle. So when you have that dopamine in the synapse, it's staying around. Dopamine's highly, highly regulated in the brain. It wants to repackage it once it's been there for a little bit and recycle it, pull it back into the presynaptic neuron. Adderall stops this process. Methylphenidate, Ritalin stops that process, so you have more dopamine hanging out there. That's great. That's where you're getting all of the advantages from the medication. However, if you have too much dopamine there, you overwhelm your body's ability to break it down. And there's several processes, enzymes that basically break it down into harmless byproducts. And that excess dopamine will react with oxygen through a process called dopamine autooxidation. It creates free radicals, reactive oxygen species. Essentially, without going too deep into the science, they're molecules that are missing an electron. And when they bump into another molecule, they take an electron and they damage cells. They can damage neurons. This process is called oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is when you have more free radicals than your body can neutralize. So your body it's incredible. Like, this is why I just marvel at the process of homeostasis. And it has this endogenous antioxidant system where it says, okay, there's free radicals here. We're going to neutralize them. They have things that donate an electron to the free radical to neutralize it, and they still remain stable. There's things like superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione, things like that. When you take Adderall, you overwhelm those defenses. So it's not just like one or two things. It's like you're blocking the reuptake. You have excess dopamine. It's reacting with oxygen. You don't have enzymes that can break it down fast enough. You don't have enough endogenous antioxidants. You don't have enough antioxidants from your food to neutralize those, and it starts damaging cells. This is oxidative stress. It happens when you smoke. It happens with pollution. It happens with UV radiation. It's not... it is a bad thing, but it's not an unusual thing. People just don't think that stimulants do it. Like, it's settled science that stimulants cause oxidative stress, but a lot of people don't realize that. I think it is absurd that people would take stimulants and not supplement with antioxidants. And so essentially, what we do at Stasis, it has some of the most powerful antioxidants on Earth. It has astaxanthin, which is from seaweed, and it has an ORAC, so an oxygen radical absorption capacity, about 300 times what you would find in wild blueberries. That means it can neutralize free radicals. It's one of the strongest antioxidants on the planet. We have an algae that's grown at a farm in Spain that enhances your body's endogenous antioxidant system through superoxide dismutase. It's also one of the most powerful antioxidants on the planet. It does not make sense. If you choose not to take Stasis with your stimulant, no problem. Please go buy an antioxidant, literally any antioxidant, and take it, because stimulants could be accelerating the aging process. It could be damaging neurons, damaging cells in your body, and it's easily preventable.
We're halfway through the episode now, and I know what you're all thinking. Where the hell is the midway sponsor we've all been patiently waiting for, Alex? Well, thank you for reminding me. A word from our sponsor, Stasis. I talk to a lot of my fellow ADHD friends that take the prescribed stimulants like Adderall or Vyvanse, and they always say the same thing, that the afternoon energy crashes, sleep interruptions, and irritability these meds cause can really deter them from enjoying the benefits that these stimulants provide. So much so that it makes them question taking them altogether. A close entrepreneurial friend of mine even came off meds entirely because he was literally and figuratively tired from the negative effects associated with these stimulants, until I urged him to try Stasis, which helped him, in his own words, correct his natural chemical balance, in turn helping with deeper sleep, even out his energy levels and promoting a calmer mood. Well, I'm happy to let you know that with Stasis, you don't have to choose anymore. Stasis is the first of its kind supplement that you take with your stimulant. It contains naturally derived vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, and antioxidants that level out the less desirable effects of stimulants, so you can take it without suffering from the downsides. It's been precision formulated to target the root causes of those downsides by regulating dopamine levels, warding off cortisol spikes, and targeting oxidative stress, all with ingredients that come straight from nature. Less brain fog, less jitters, increased focus, more sustained energy throughout the day, and less stress. If you take stimulants, why wouldn't you boost your brain health with Stasis? ADHD Chatter listeners can get 20% off with the link in the description. Try it for yourself. And maybe I'm biased, but there is one other proven way to relieve stress, and that's by carrying on watching the episode. Aside from the oxidative stress, what are the top 5 adverse reactions to stimulants that you see?
Trouble sleeping, jitters, so nervousness, anxiety, things like that. Changes in personality. Anhedonia, it's one of the side effects that I get. Similar to kind of like depression in a way. That's the way most people think about it. It's where things that used to give you pleasure no longer are pleasurable. And it's a disorder of dopamine. And then lastly, crash. Crash is also, it's a non-scientific term, but anybody who takes stimulants knows that when it starts wearing off, your dopamine's depleted. I feel like this sense of impending doom. I get really irritable. I don't want to be around people. Sometimes I'll get home and I just want to shut off all the lights and curl up in a little ball. It's horrible. Like, and it's not just, it's people who haven't felt it are just like, oh yeah, you're tired. I get it. It's like, no, I'm not tired. I'm like, my world is collapsing and I don't know what's wrong with me. And that is just such a horrible feeling. And to know that that's coming. And like this is something, there's a lot of things that cause it. One of them is dopamine depletion. So just as I was telling you, with stimulants, you've just flooded your synapses with all of this dopamine. You've blocked that recycling reuptake process. And so in your neurons, there's no more dopamine. They're just like, hey, now your Adderall is wearing off. We don't have anything that we can dump into here. And there are several vitamins and minerals that are rate-limiting cofactors in the production of dopamine. So your body takes tyrosine and it converts it into dopamine, norepinephrine. And to do this, it needs vitamins and minerals. They're essential in this process. Things like magnesium, zinc, B vitamins. We understand that people taking stimulants need to supplement with these so that they have higher levels and they're able to replenish their natural dopamine stores faster and more efficiently. So that crash, it's not that, I don't think there's ever going to be a way to completely prevent it, but it's shorter, it's not as bad, it's not as deep, and we just get these reviews from people where that in itself is just life-changing, really life-changing.
I think a lot of people are going to listen to what you just said, heard the adverse effects and relate, particularly that what you said earlier about being in the cafe and just feeling enraged by something completely irrational, like overhearing a conversation or loud chewing. It's that like irrationality.
Oh God, loud chewing. Oh my God. Don't even start.
It can turn a good day to a bad day in a split second. With Stasis, you take Stasis. What's the time frame someone can expect to feel the benefits after they sort of first take it? And what are the benefits that they would experience physiologically?
So there's benefits day one, and they just keep getting better. So it depends on, like I said, it depends on the person. Everybody's genetics and their response to stimulants are different. For me, I get horrific side effects as soon as I take stimulants. There's some people where they don't even feel any side effects, and that's fine. So when we were talking about oxidative stress, you're not really going to feel that day one. It's just you're preventing damage from happening, and over time, you're going to start feeling better, and you're going to not feel worse, which is really hard to tell people. Like, you don't understand, you will feel worse if you keep doing this. It just stops you from feeling worse. And it's almost like, similar to in the longevity space. Imagine if you're aging 10 months a year instead of 12. Or in this case, instead of aging 15 months a year, you're only aging 12 months a year. Are you going to feel that? Are you going to notice that day one, week one, month one? No. Things with sleep. So Stasis has two formulas. We have a daytime formula that you take at the same time as your stimulant. We have a nighttime formula that you take at, bedtime, half an hour before you're going to go to sleep. People usually notice benefits to sleep in the first week. And again, not everyone has difficulty sleeping, but 63% of people report better sleep. I actually, I don't want to take out my phone, but I have exact numbers from a quantitative study that we've done on customers. And I have some qualitative customer reviews where they can tell you better than I can the benefits of taking Stasis.
How does ADHD show up in your relationship?
There's so many ways that it shows up in my life. And my wife is an anthropologist. She does deep consumer insights. She is doing a project for Stasis right now. We're developing a children's product. So she's interviewing parents. When we did the original Stasis, she just went and she interviewed 20 potential customers and people who had severe ADHD. I came home one day and she has this book. Is it you, me, or ADHD? I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, Dan, I thought you were just kind of like, you had all these weird things about you that I could learn to love you in spite of, but I just thought it was quirks to your personality. Now that I've spent hours and hours interviewing with people with ADHD, holy shit, you have ADHD. Like, now I understood it. I thought I understood it. I had heard about it, but now that I see it over and over again in so many people, and I just see how it impacts our relationship, and she's been so much more tolerant.
Have you heard of RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria?
Yes.
How does rejection show up in your relationship?
I can remember the first time I read about it. So I didn't fully understand. I thought that I was really sensitive to things, but I've had these absolute crushing rejections in my life. And I'm very ambitious. And so I think the more ambitious you are, the more rejections you get. It shows up in things like my relationship. It shows up a lot in business. When I applied to MBA programs, I applied to 7. I got into 1. I got into INSEAD. Remember, my top choice school was MIT, and I bombed the interview. It was like horrible. I could not get out of bed. It was devastating. Like, my life was over. I had worked so hard for this goal, and to be rejected by the school that I just thought was like, it was almost like destiny that I go there. As a founder, I had to pitch investors, and I would just get rejected over and over and over again. And especially when it's something that I truly believe would help the world, to put yourself out there and talk to an investor, and some of these kind of like, you develop relationships with them and you get so excited, and then it's just like, no, we don't think this is going to work for one reason or another. And it was so demoralizing, especially when you're in the middle of a fundraise and it's just like, what the only way that I managed to make it through was I would read customer reviews. And I know that the product that we're creating every day now, tens of thousands of people on this planet wake up and take our products, and their day is better. And still, we have at the company a channel where we put in positive customer reviews. There was this one that came in this week that just, when I read it, regardless of what investors think, regardless of how the business is doing, no matter what's happening in the world, when I read these things, it just melts me. And I know that this is the right path. It's changing people's lives. Is it okay if I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this is from a Stasis user that felt really compelled to write a review. So I don't know if this is a man or a woman. It says, I've been taking stimulants for over a decade. They have allowed me to succeed at school and at work. At the same time, I believe they are also responsible for my divorce and multiple job firings. As stimulants became less effective, I've had to increase my dose, which has made the stimulant crash that much worse. This supplement is the first I have found that allows me to be high functioning while also preventing any type of crash at the end of the day. And that's pretty much the only difference I've noticed after taking for over a month, but it makes all the difference in the world to me. I only wish I had had this option 10 years ago when I first started taking stimulants. Things like that. And, I've heard of divorces. I've heard one customer I helped check into a rehab. This was a couple of years ago. But my phone number used to be on the website. It was literally like I was the only customer success person, and anytime people would call up, I would pick up the phone and I would listen to people going through relationship issues. I would listen to people who were abusing stimulants, or people who had horrific side effects, or like any type of thing. I just had all of these conversations over and over and over again. And knowing that the product is helping these people where it can. And again, no product's perfect, but it helps. It's so deeply rewarding to me.
I think it's the opposite of RSD is sort of the euphoria to praise. So I imagine it must have been really, really wonderful to read those. Divorce is obviously a huge, huge issue, a huge topic. But if we sort of row back a bit, what are some more common day-to-day scenarios someone with ADHD might go through that Stasis might help with?
So when you talk about the crash and kind of that irritability, I was talking with a customer this week. She lives in Los Angeles and she drives home during rush hour. And she was going off on how she wants to literally murder other drivers. And she just has these meltdowns when she's driving. I live in New York. I don't drive. I'm very fortunate that I walk almost everywhere. And for me, it's slow walkers. If there's a slow walker in front of me, it is the most frustrating. I'm always heads down, want to go where I want. I've heard so many different iterations of this. One that, I can't relate to because I don't have children, but we have a lot of parents. One of the most interesting things is most women choose not to take stimulants while they breastfeed, but as soon as they're off, they go for an Adderall prescription. And they're dealing with, they want to be patient with their children, but they also have a crash at that time of day when some of their kids may be coming home, things like that. And I've just heard so many things where parents are ashamed of their behavior. They feel guilty and they don't like how they're showing up in their family. Stasis helps mitigate that crash, that irritability. And I mean, that's incredible.
The slow walkers thing it was painful just hearing you bring them up, especially when you're in a supermarket and you're like on a mission, or you're in a shop and you're on a mission, you're desperate to do something, and there's just the slow walker. Yeah. It's the.
I think you should be able to give people tickets for walking slow. There has to be some kind of penalty. I don't understand. Like it's so frustrating.
Rage within me. Dan, I want to talk about how we can reduce that stimulant crash a bit further. I want to quickly divert focus back to your item because there's another story there, isn't there? There's a story of you in a cafe.
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, I would go and study in different coffee shops. And I would take, my books that I'm studying, and then I would take out my milligram scale and I would start weighing out my nootropics. And so it's a bunch of white powders. I'm in New York, or back then I think I was in Boston. And all of these people would look at me like I'm crazy. They're just like, you pull out a bunch of white baggies full of white powder and a milligram scale in the middle of a cafe and start weighing things. And people just, they lose it. I just remember being so focused that I didn't care. Like people, that was, there's the rejection sensitive dysphoria. There's also that oppositional defiance disorder where I'm just like, I don't care what you think about me. I'm doing what I think is best. And I know that this is the right way. Sometimes I actually do, sometimes I don't. But that's something that's so deeply ingrained in me. And I would just do it no matter where I was.
Yeah, I can imagine the optics of sitting in a cafe with scales and lots of white powder probably isn't ideal.
And especially a psychopharmacology or a chemistry textbook, it's like
Al Pacino
kind of Breaking Bad and yeah.
I am what's he say? I am who you call. And, that's it, yeah. I am the one who knocks, the Breaking Bad reference. Hilarious visual. Dan, I want to do the ADHD agony aunt section, which is called the washing machine of woes, because my item is a washing machine because I always forget my laundry in the machine. Do you forget your laundry in the machine?
So, brief story. Laundry is like the best predictor of how I'm doing in life. When I'm not medicated, when I'm not taking nootropics, when I lived in New York before moving in with my wife, my laundromat, I would have to go down from a walk-up building. I would have to go around the corner, and it closes at midnight. Every Saturday. I'm the guy at midnight taking clothes that are half wet out of the washing machine and taking them back, and they sit in a half pile for days. And it was just so, I can't tell you how many times I was kicked out of the laundromat at midnight. When I'm doing things right, that just disappears. Things like that are no longer an obstacle. And that's what Nootropics has unlocked for me. That's what treating my ADHD has done for me. And it's not it just goes away. And that makes a huge, huge difference.
Well, I think there'll be a lot of people listening to that relating, because I know that the laundry issue is huge in the community, and that's why it's my item. Every week, Dan, I ask my Instagram community to send me their woes, and I choose one, put it in the washing machine, and I read it out to see if we can get some wisdom from the guest. This week, in the washing machine of woes, someone's written in and asked, I really need ADHD medications because they do help me focus, but I swear they are causing trouble in my system, and the doctors here in the UK don't take that seriously, as they're more just a feeling and quite hard to monitor. From your experience and research, is there anything natural I can try to calm these symptoms?
That is the perfect question. I am an expert in that. I am not familiar with the UK medical system, so I don't know how they prescribe here. I'm also not a clinician. But from my experience, there are several key things that anybody taking stimulants should think about. So one is antioxidants. There are well-known antioxidants, vitamin E, vitamin C, things like that. There are also things like astaxanthin, oceanics, that wild blueberries, all of these things help reduce oxidative stress caused by stimulant use and can have a huge impact over time. Then you have a class of ingredients called adaptogens, things like saffron, ashwagandha. They target the hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal axis, the HPA axis, that produces cortisol, the body's stress hormone. One of the things that she didn't really describe her symptoms, but it may be from a heightened stress response from having too much cortisol. And adaptogens essentially modulate the levels of cortisol in the body naturally. I would highly recommend looking into adaptogens. Then you have cofactors for dopamine production. This is when we were talking about dopamine depletion, so that crash when the medication's wearing off and your body's struggling to make tyrosine into dopamine to replenish your reserves. That's what a lot of people describe as a crash. It's also called dopamine rebound. So some of the main cofactors are magnesium, zinc, and B vitamins. And one of the other things that I see a lot is sleep disturbances. So it depends on how their body metabolizes the stimulant. A lot of people have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. And we found that taking a natural sleep supplement can really be beneficial. There are also, I know melatonin's very controversial. I personally think because not only does it help with circadian rhythm, it's also a powerful antioxidant that people on stimulants could supplement with a very low dose of melatonin. There's things like magnesium, making sure that it's a very powerful form of magnesium. I prefer bisglycinate. All of those will help with sleep.
Truly fascinating, Dan. Thank you very much on behalf of the anonymous user. And if you want to submit a woe for the machine, anyone listening, you can DM the Instagram. A couple of interesting questions, Dan. ADHD has really been a major factor in your life, clearly. Do you think ADHD is a force for good in the world and a determining factor in our progression as a species?
When I didn't know how to work with my ADHD, I thought it was the worst curse. I thought it was like a disability, something that had essentially limited my potential in life. And it was demoralizing because I just didn't understand how to work with it. When I became a chef and I unlocked this success, that was great. But where I struggled was doing the things that I didn't want to do. So that piece I thought would have severely limited me and would have limited us as a species. I think that where we are now is my great-grandparents never stepped foot in a classroom. They were in the Carpathian Mountains. Like, we didn't evolve to be in a world like we are today. And for some of us, like my sister in particular, it's really easy to conform to this environment. For somebody like me, it's impossible without some type of help. So going back to that, I think it's if you learn how to work with your brain, if you learn how to treat your ADHD, there's nothing you can't do. And I didn't truly believe that until it happened to me. But now I work at a desk most of the day. That concept of doing that, it's impossible. I didn't think I could ever have a life like this, but I can. And so I don't think that it's a setback for most people, and I don't think that it's a negative thing for the species.
It's fascinating. I think a lot of the traits of ADHD that people associate with negativity have a positive reason for being there too. We had the brilliant Ned Hallowell on a few weeks ago, and he was saying RSD, rejection sensitivity. When we mentioned it earlier, in the modern world, it makes us very sensitive to criticism and danger. But if we were to go back when we lived in tribes, that ultra sensitivity would be a massive strength, a massive positive, because it would make us ultra aware to danger. We would hear the lion snap the twig, and we would be aware of it before anyone else, and it would be an evolutionary advantage. I want to talk about myths, because I think there's a lot of myths around ADHD that I don't agree with. One of them being that we don't work hard enough. I think people with ADHD work harder than a lot of people. A lot of it's just internalized. What are some ADHD myths that you'd like to debunk?
I hear ADHD myths all the time. Some of the most common that, God, I don't have social media, so I don't get into, otherwise I would be one of these guys having wars with people. If Adderall makes you jittery, then you don't really have ADHD. Complete bullshit. I've been called lazy, stupid, unmotivated, and people just don't think ADHD is real. That's another huge myth. Taking Adderall is cheating. That's one of the biggest ones. And there's this stigma around it. So I see our customer list. I would never, ever say who buys our product publicly or anything like that. But I can tell you we have very famous people, some founders with incredible companies, some people in politics, and they won't come out publicly and endorse the product because it's one of the few areas of mental health where there's still this huge stigma. And it's because people think ADHD doesn't exist. Taking stimulants is cheating, and they don't want to associate themselves with it. To me, it's crazy. People are public about taking antidepressants. We've come so far with mental health in general and destigmatization of all of these things. I think ADHD, and in particular using stimulants, is one of the few things that are still highly stigmatized and controversial when they shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, massively. Everyone has ADHD these days, or even worse, ADHD doesn't exist. I mean, awful things to say. You know, so many of us have worked so hard to finally get validation.
One of my favorites is also, why don't you just get a notebook? That's like,
but when you're in the moment, when you're in the shop and you look at it, you do genuinely believe that the notebook's going to save the day.
I was talking with a customer. This was really sad because she got her dream job, and like a month in, her boss pulled her aside and had this talk with her like, hey, something has to change. And he said that, why don't you just get a notebook? And how can you explain that to somebody? And being in that position, it's got to be so demoralizing for her. And yeah.
How many notebooks do you have, Dan?
Oh God. I use notebooks. I use the pile system, which is classic. And going back to when I was 10 years old, I had a pile wherever I went. Yeah.
Final question for you, Dan, and probably an important one. Why was it important for you to come on here today?
I think that the more people can understand that there are solutions out there, when I look back at that pain that I had growing up and those years of not understanding that there was a solution, I thought so small. Like I didn't realize, I could have never imagined the way my life is today. And I just didn't see that solution. The more that I do things like this, and the more that people understand there are solutions out there, whether that's Stasis, whether that's Thesis, whether that's Nootropics, whether that's therapy, I think that there just needs to be more solutions out there. There's not going to be one that's perfect for everyone. But seeing that there are people who have ADHD and are successful, like you and like all of these other people, and being able to relate to that, whether you're diagnosed as a child, diagnosed as an adult, depending on the type of symptoms you have, there's always a solution. You just need to look, and if you keep looking, you will find something that's truly transformative.
Yeah, no, massively agree. It's one of the main reasons I started the podcast was to balance that narrative around what it actually means to have ADHD. I think still it's a shame if you Google what is ADHD, it still just says struggle with focus, struggle with attention, struggle with disorganization. But with help and the right management tools, you can unlock so many positives as well, like the creativity and the pattern recognition and being great in a crisis and resilience and loyalty and entrepreneurialism, all of these things that make someone a tremendous asset to society. We have a closing tradition on the podcast, Dan, where I delivered to you a letter that's been written by the previous guest. And the previous guest wrote 3 rules to live by.
3 rules to live by. Treat others how you want to be treated. I could not agree more with that. I think that that is incredibly important. Respect other people's boundaries and your own. Again, great. And then patience and kindness are your greatest tools. Don't underestimate their power. It's really incredible.
Those 3, I mean, they're profound, aren't they? And
they're simple but hard. And that's the whole thing. One of the biggest surprises I've had at being a founder is how much ethics plays a role in what I do. And a lot of these things really just touch on ethics. And it's very easy to not recognize how important it is and not really, because these things are simple, but they're really hard to do. And some of them can be painful, but not doing them is more painful.
This is slowly turning into my favorite part of the show because you get the 3 rules from the previous guest and then brilliant supplementations like what you've just said really add to them. Dan, this has been truly fascinating, insightful, educational, and hilarious too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Dan, what's the most impulsive thing you've ever done?
God, this is such a hard question. I do impulsive things all the time. The first thing that came to mind was I used to, when I would travel, I would go alone with a machete into the jungle. So
you went onto a plane.
I would, the first time I did it was the Darien Gap. I just buy a machete there. I don't take the machete on the plane. Although I did take a machete on the plane to come back because I have one at my house. But I've done this in East Africa. I've done it in India, Darien Gap, the Amazon, all of these places. And I just get, depending on how long I'm going to be out, sometimes I'll take a stove, sometimes I won't. Machete, hammock, rain tarp, all of this stuff. And I just go off alone. And I feel alive. I feel incredible. It is I don't know if I could do that now. It's probably been 8-9 years since the last time I did it because it's incredibly dangerous, but it is almost spiritual to me. Most alive is I was alone in the Darien Gap and there were 100 monkeys that just went over my head. And it's like when you're alone and you're off trail, you're in the middle of nowhere. The scariest, I've had several guns pulled on me.
By who?
It was in Ethiopia when you go east from Addis before you hit Somalia. And I went hiking and got several rifles pulled on me. I think the worst was we were hiking at night and it was a park ranger who did it. And we got lost. It was me and this guy who I had just met. He was from Portugal. And we were hiking around and we were completely lost. We were walking around in East Africa, like in this park. And it's so fucking scary. Like you shine your flashlight and you see eyes, okay? Finally, we see this like distant campfire and we hike up to it because we're like, we have no idea where we are. We have no idea what we're doing. It's pitch black. And the guy pulls his rifle and he shines a light right into our eyes. And we have a flashlight too. And the guy I was with shines the flashlight at this guy and he's like essentially blinding him. And he's screaming in Amharic. And he has his rifle like this. And you hear him like, you know, and I went to the guy I was with. I grabbed his flashlight, pointed it at me, like at us, and put my hand up. Adrenaline pumping. That was a moment I won't forget.
That's no disrespect to the other guests, but that is the most interesting, most impulsive answer I think we've had on this podcast.
I have more. I just, for a period in my life, I was very, very impulsive and I enjoyed pushing things.
What does it feel like when someone's pointing a gun in your face?
I mean, it's happened several times while traveling. It's scary. Like, I'm not going to lie. I think that the guy that I was with kind of froze and had a panic attack, and I could see in his face that he thought that was it. One of the things about me is I can stay calm. So I was scared. They're like, I'm not going to lie. I was fucking scared shitless, but I was calm. I didn't freeze.
That's mental. I mean, we could probably leave it at that. That's